So we draw close to the end of the season, with 12 episodes down and 1 to go. I understand the season has been some sort of a controversy. It is adding events that are not in the books, it is missing bits and pieces out of the books. This actor or that actress do not really look their parts, do not really look like their novel counterparts. But after so many reviews this season, you probably know my arguments against each and every one of those already. TV adaptation versus novel, TV adaptation versus novel, and talent trumps look accuracy or precision. So if I were to give advice here, and you're free to take it or not take it, I'd just say try to enjoy what remains of the season, because we're once again about to hit one of those long droughts of no episodes, bringing to life, and I'm not going to say all, but the majority of key moments out of the Outlander book series. But hey guys, and welcome back to my review of Providence, the 12th and penultimate episode of Season 4 of Outlander and the events of Drums of Autumn, the 4th novel in the Outlander book series. Now, one thing about this week's episode that is unlike most episodes this season and in general is it does pick up right where last week's episode left off, continuing with the very same scene. So we've got Roger having made it to the Mohawk village, being told that he would remain captive over there. There is really no going back from this one, at least from what it seems at first, unless, of course, something or someone happens. But let us though start breaking down how it all went down on this episode with Roger and everyone else. Number 1. I think I've already mentioned last week that Murtaugh's capture is a parallel to HERMAN's husband and his imprisonment in the novel, making Murtaugh the show's version of the character. Now, to respond to some of the comments that I got on last week's video, and the ones that I'm going to be getting on this video as well, it's not really about the level of violence that each of them represents, but rather the replacement over here is more about being opposed to a governing body in general, and ending up in captivity. That is why I used a phrase like the show's version of HERMAN's husband rather than the show's HERMAN's husband. So the concept is really the same, the target is the same as well, the only difference is one's a Quaker and the other resorts to violence. But number 2, I assume you all remember I was raving about MARSALI'S performance on last week's episode. Now I know a lot of fans might not actually agree with me, you know, those who are just fans of the show for Claire and Jamie, or those who just didn't like the character on last week's episode. But that, in my opinion, doesn't change a thing, because her performance was great, the acting for the character was just off the roof. And of course there was the fact that her arc on last week's episode did lead into Fergus's arc on this week's episode. Obviously, MARSALI'S plan seemed to have backfired on this week's episode. The outcome that she might have feared the most on last week's episode, when she put the entire plan into motion, Fergus actually joining in with Murtaugh, that seems to have come into effect on this week's episode. Only he's doing his own thing, trying to save Murtaugh, kind of becoming his own leader. But number 3 though, the order of the events is not really done as an exact science over here. But anyway though, John Gray informing Brianna that Stephen Bonnet has been captured. That's definitely right out of the novels, and is the trigger for a few events that would follow. But I've got to stop for a moment here and state that Brianna's reaction, the shock, the surprise, and the anger, all of them, and in my opinion, were pretty authentic on the scene. It's really one of 2 reactions that I would expect of a woman in her situation, because, and this is just what I think, it's either cry, partially out of joy, and partially because it brings back all these shit memories, or she would be this person, trying to keep it together, yet extremely shocked and extremely angry. Now you all probably remember that I'm extremely opposed to Brianna not understanding the situation, not reading it or reading the room, not understanding that she's in a different time or a different age. But there is this one statement that I did kind of understand the significance of in this situation, which was basically her no consequence. That sarcastic statement over there is not to imply that she is being a bitch and all of that stuff, the kind of stuff I'm going to read in the comments later on, but probably because it wants to imply the difference between the age and the time. Look at where you live now, what time you live now, how much easier it is to not confuse the victim with the perpetrator, how much easier it is to understand that the person who should carry the shame and the guilt in this kind of situation is the person who did the crime and not the person it was inflicted on. All in all, I loved Brianna's reaction on this scene. It was really good, really expressive. But all of that does bring us to number 4, Brianna wanting to see Bonnet is the natural outcome going by the novels, and the outcome they would have probably made a choice to write for the series if it were not to be part of the source material. That's the kind of thing that people love in a drama TV series, the kind of twist that people love. But however though, and over here, she never actually does what she did in the novel. She does not blackmail John Gray a second time over in order for him to comply. I don't remember the exact words of Jamie's letter to Brianna from the novel, word for word, but it definitely was as heartfelt as this one, and of course signing it, your father, James Fraser, that felt very emotional, very heartfelt as well. But on another note though, I gotta state that every scene that Brianna has with John Gray is amazing, and not just because Brianna is doing so well, acting this season in general, but because John Gray is very well portrayed. The actor just never ceases to amaze. But once again, the talk of Brianna and John Gray brings us to number 5. Brianna's reaction the closer she gets to reuniting, if that is even a suitable phrase, to describe a second encounter of any kind with Stephen Bonnet, that was just on point. Now while missing her mother is just part of all of it, it's also a shield to forget that she's not sure about what meeting Bonnet for a second time over might or would do to her, because she's not really sure over here that she's gonna get the kind of closure that she wants to get, that she's looking for. On the other hand, John Gray is just extremely kind to her all the way in the middle of all of this, hence Brianna's claim that he's impossible not to like. But moving on to number 6, the surprise in the situation with Fergus on this episode was actually MARSALI'S reaction to his plan, wanting to save Murtaugh from his imprisonment as much as Fergus did. Now MARSALI is starting to act more and more like Claire. I did mention that during my review of season 3 episodes, and Fergus more and more like Jamie as well. Her persistence as well to be part of all of this was quite amazing. Again, great acting for the character. Her persistence, her strong personality, and her love for Fergus, it's all very Claire-like as well. But most importantly though, it's all used as a backdoor to do their story the way it is in the novels, putting them on a road to Fraser's Ridge. I think I did mention this on a previous review this season, but in the books MARSALI gives birth to her baby in Jamaica. Fergus, on the other hand, sticks with the Frasers, leaves her back in Jamaica, and goes back and grabs her to Fraser's Ridge after she's given birth. Now I'm not really 100% sure that what I'm about to say here is 100% authentic, but I either read this or watched it on an interview that Diana Gabaldon kinda completely forgot about MARSALI writing Drums of Autumn. So later on, in the events of the novel, she was like, oops, totally forgot about this character. Let's do a little bit of a retcon to bring her back by doing this entire story about her being left back in Jamaica until she has her baby. But moving on to number 7, Roger in the Mohawk village, seemingly making the best of his situation. A few variations here and there from the novel, but nothing major really, all to the same effect. Roger survives all of this. But moving on to number 8, Joy Ayoun, the woman that speaks to Roger in French, and the baby in her arms that seems like it does not belong. Obviously, she's the woman who in the novel fell in love with Father Alexander and had his baby. Now I don't really remember the part about her ever acting as a savior to Roger. From what I remember, Roger was actually in the village way longer than a day or two or even a couple of weeks before he ended up being thrown into that hut. But number 9, the entire issue in the novels that had Father Alexander taken away from the woman he loved and the child he had, imprisoned and tortured by the Mohawk, exactly as we see over here, is exactly for the same reason. His refusal to baptize the child, as he did state, and for the reasons that he did state on this episode. Now the story that was relayed by Father Alexander to Roger on this episode is pretty similar to what happened in the novel, but not really the exact same. So it has some differences there, jumping right from I met the girl to love and baby, but both stories are to the same effect. Fell in love, had a baby, product of impure desire, baptized a child, no I won't, screw you. You've gotta love these parallels though, both men in love, both men in the same hut, and all because the same road, paved with Cupid's arrows, got them right there. Even better, Alexander describing and Roger feeling every word, like he is the one being described. But before I move on, did anyone notice the Count of Monte Cristo reference over there on that scene? I mean, the priest's name is Alexander, he's French, and so was Alexander Dumas, author of the Count of Monte Cristo, and the digging that was being done by Roger on that scene in the hut, that was very Edmond Dante and Abbe Faria in the novel, and the funny thing is that Abbe Faria in the novel is also a priest. But moving on to number 10, for those who hated on last week's episode because they never explained what was going on with Roger, what happened to Roger at the Stones? He does, after all, relay it all on this episode. Personally, I think it was way better than any kind of flashback showing us what happened. The entire thing with his describing his feelings to this total stranger, so much emotion, these big tears filling his eyes, in my opinion, that was better than anything a flashback sequence would have presented us with. But moving on to number 11, the entire second encounter between Brianna and Bonnet was very much by the novel. The prison on fire as well, and so is the escape of Bonnet. The one element that has changed massively over here is the cause of the fire and the way that Bonnet escaped. In the novel, the fire and explosion were set by Bonnet's escape aid and had nothing to do with either FERGUS and MARSALI'S or with Murtaugh. But a lot of things were just taken right out of the novels. The gem for the maintenance of the baby, that was right out of the novel. Only he does give it to Brianna during his escape and right before they part ways. The soldier the guys ended up carrying was also right out of the novel, inspired by the novel. Only instead of that soldier, it was an unconscious John Gray carried out by Stephen Bonnet himself upon the persistence of Brianna that he do so. Number 12, Roger's escape as well is different in the novel. In the novel, he never comes back, he's rather recaptured. In the novel, he makes his escape after he hears loud noises outside, including Gaelic. So going back for the priest was a change in narrative here, and in my opinion a good one, builds character. This moment was just extremely well done, only instead of saving the man like he probably intended, he kind of made the process faster, reduced the man's suffering. That entire scene was just amazing. I mean, Roger's pain, Joy joining in with Alexander, that was yet another touching moment. And man, the soundtrack, that just made it 10 times as touching. Not ashamed to say I cried a little bit over there. But finally though, number 13, an entire episode without Jamie and Claire. I know that kind of thing usually triggers some fans, but to tell the truth, this is practically one of my favorite episodes this season, if not actually my favorite. The part with Roger and Alexander was just perfect. That entire arc, all of these guys were just stars. I give this episode a 9 out of 10, not out of generosity, but out of excitement for an episode without the two lead characters being this amazing. That being said though, my work here is done, so let me know in the comments down below what you thought of the episode. Hope you liked it. Let me know what your favorite part of the episode was and what you're looking forward to on the finale. Let me know as well if you did like this video by dropping it one of those much appreciated likes, and if that were to be the case, you can always subscribe and enable notifications for my future videos, community posts, and live streams. But until the next time, you tune in for another one of my videos. Thank you so much for tuning into this video and have a great day.